The first time I saw him again, I nearly dropped my cup of tea. It wasn't because he spoke, or even that he looked at me. He didn't. He was just there, sitting across the dining hall, by the window, hunched over a newspaper he didn't seem to read. Lips pressed into a quiet line that hadn't changed in 60 years. But I knew that posture. I knew that silence. It hit me like a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding all my life. It had been exactly 61 years, 4 months, and 9 days since I last saw William Archer. Not that I was counting, not exactly. I hadn't said his name aloud in decades, and yet it had never truly left my thoughts. Like a song half remembered or the scent of jasmine in spring. He had stayed, not in the everyday, no, but in the quiet places, in the pauses between chores, in the crackle of vinyl on Sunday mornings, in the letter I kept at the bottom of my jewelry box that no one knew about. The letter he never answered, or maybe never received. It was 1963 when he left. The war had already taken too many of our friends, but William wanted to serve. Said he couldn't live with himself if he didn't at least try. I told him I'd wait, and I did, for years. But no letters came, no news, no word. Just silence. And eventually a kind man named Thomas, who offered me peace, if not the passion I once knew. We married in '68, had 2 sons, one moved to Seattle, one to Germany. Thomas passed 15 years ago. I mourned him sincerely. He had been gentle, steady. He loved me in a quiet way that made life soft, even when it ached. But he wasn't William. So when I saw that familiar tilt of the shoulders, the stubborn set of his jaw, I thought my heart would stop. Or maybe leap out of my chest. It did something loud, at least. Something that made my hands tremble as I set down the teacup, trying not to spill. He didn't look up, didn't glance around, didn't even seem to notice me. But I saw him, and I knew. It took me 3 days to work up the nerve to speak to him. 3 days of pretending to read my book while sneaking glances across the room. 3 days of noticing the way he stirred his coffee 3 times before sipping, always counterclockwise. 3 days of watching him walk the garden path every afternoon at precisely 4 o'clock, like a ritual only he remembered. I didn't know if he'd recognize me. I didn't know if he'd remember. Maybe 60 years had erased me from his memory, but I had to know. On the 4th day, I followed him. Not obviously, not too close. He walked slower than I remembered, with a cane and a slight limp, but still upright, still proud. I waited until he reached the far end of the garden by the old maple tree, the one that dropped golden leaves like confetti this time of year. And then softly I said, "William?" He turned, slowly. His eyes found mine. And for a moment, nothing happened. No gasp, no recognition. Just 2 old people staring at each other in a garden that smelled of autumn and fading time. Then his brows furrowed, and he whispered, "Margaret." My heart broke and healed, all in the same breath. He didn't rush forward, didn't cry out. He simply smiled, a slow, uncertain smile that trembled at the corners. "I thought you died," he said. "I thought you forgot me," I replied. He looked down at his cane. "I never forgot. I just didn't know how to find you." I wanted to be angry, to ask why he never wrote, why he vanished, why he let me believe I'd been abandoned. But standing there watching the wind tangle his thin white hair, I couldn't, because I saw it in his eyes. He had carried the same weight. We sat on the bench beneath the maple, didn't speak for a while. The leaves fell around us like they had all the time in the world. Finally, I asked, "Why are you here?" He chuckled dryly. "Heart, lungs, bones. Take your pick. They told me I needed help. I told them I didn't. Guess who won?" I smiled. That sounded like him. "And you?" he asked. Lonely? I said, tired of pretending I liked being alone. He nodded. That's honest. I'm too old to lie, I said. His hand brushed mine. Not on purpose, but not by accident either. Over the next few days, we spoke more. Not about everything, not yet, but about books, music, the world we didn't understand anymore. He told me he'd been in Italy for decades, that he taught English to children who now had children of their own. He never married. I tried, he said, but none of them were you. That should have made me swoon. It made me ache instead. I showed him the letter, the one I wrote in 1964. I carried it in my purse, wrapped in silk. He read it with shaking hands, then closed his eyes. I never got it, he whispered. I swear to you, Margaret. I believe you, I said, and I did. Because I had to. Because forgiveness is the only gift we can still afford to give at this age. One night, he knocked on my door, held out a record. I don't have a player anymore, he said, but maybe we can just remember. I took the record, ran my fingers over the grooves, and began to hum. He joined in, and we danced. Barely, but it was enough. I don't know what comes next. I don't need to. All I know is that I'm 84, and I just found the boy I lost in a war I stopped believing in. And somehow, through all the noise and silence and broken years, we remembered the way back, to each other. Some letters are never meant to be read. Others are simply waiting. The one I gave William was both. It was written in June 1963, 3 weeks after the last time we spoke, and 2 days after I watched his train disappear into the horizon. I remember sitting by the window with a teacup that had gone cold in my hand, the radio playing softly in the background. Outside, the street buzzed with life, but inside me, there was only stillness. That's when I wrote it. A letter filled with fear, longing, and all the things I hadn't said out loud before he left. I had folded it neatly, sealed it in an envelope, addressed it to a barracks I wasn't even sure he'd reach. Then I placed it in my drawer and never mailed it. I didn't know why at the time. Perhaps part of me was afraid he wouldn't write back. Or worse, that he would. Now, 60 years later, I finally gave it to him. William's fingers trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. We were sitting again under the old maple tree, the afternoon sun catching the silver strands in his hair. He didn't speak as he read. He didn't look up. I watched him instead. I watched 60 years pass over his face. When he finally lowered the letter, his eyes glistened. "You were braver than I ever was," he said. "I was just scared," I replied. He folded the paper as gently as if it might tear under the weight of memory. Then he pressed it to his chest for a moment before sliding it into the inner pocket of his cardigan. "I'm going to keep this close," he said, "for the days when I forget who I used to be." That night I lay awake in bed. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the hallway lights outside my door. My thoughts drifted, not just to him, but to me. The me I used to be. The girl with a heart too full and hands that wouldn't stop shaking every time she thought of him. What had happened to her? She'd grown old. She'd raised 2 sons. She'd buried a husband. She'd learned how to eat alone, how to mend a cardigan by candlelight, how to pretend the quiet didn't hurt. But somewhere inside me, she still lived, and William had found her again. The next day, he handed me something unexpected, a photograph. It was black and white, faded at the corners. A snapshot of a young soldier in uniform, seated on a low stone wall, one boot untied, a crooked grin stretching across his face. I took it gently. "I've never seen this," I said. "I kept it in my wallet," he said, "all these years, the only one I didn't lose." He didn't need to say it, but I knew. He brought it back with him. We started spending mornings together after that. Not long conversations, not at first. Just shared silence, warm tea, the occasional hum of a song neither of us could name anymore. But it was enough. It felt like something being rebuilt, slowly, brick by brick. Trust wasn't automatic even after all these years. It had to be grown again, tenderly, like a fragile seed sprouting from hardened soil. One morning I brought my journal. Inside it were pieces of me, quotes I loved, dreams I'd scribbled and forgotten, poems I wrote on napkins and tucked away. I showed him a page I'd written the night he left. It simply said, "Come back, even if you're not the same. I'll recognize the shape of your silence." He stared at it a long time. Then he touched my hand. "I'm not the same," he whispered. "I know," I said. "Neither am I." And yet, in that moment, it felt like we had never left each other at all. A week later, William knocked gently on my door. He held something in his hand. A letter. The envelope was worn, the paper inside thinner from age. The date in the corner said July 1964. "I wrote this to you," he said, "but I never sent it. I kept it in a box. Always meant to find you again. I guess I thought it would be too late." He placed it on the table. "Read it whenever you want. Or not. I just needed you to have it." Then he left. I stared at it for a long time before I picked it up. I opened it slowly. The handwriting was his, strong, deliberate, a little slanted. It said, "Margaret, I don't know where you are. I don't know if you're married or if you still live in that little house with the green fence. But if somehow this reaches you, know that I didn't forget. I never could. I still remember the way you laughed when the rain soaked your shoes. I remember the smell of your hair, like violets in summer. I remember you told me to come back, and I tried. I really did. But life is cruel, and I was a coward. I hope someday, somehow you'll forgive me. I loved you then, I love you now. Always. William." I didn't cry. Not right away. Instead, I folded the letter, placed it beside mine, and whispered, "I already did." They say some stories are better left in the past. But what if the past never let go? What if it waited patiently, quietly, until two people old enough to forget finally remembered? That's what it felt like sitting with William each morning now. Not like starting something new, but like returning to a chapter we never finished. One we'd both dog-eared in the back of our minds. A story without a proper ending. It began with our walks. Each morning after breakfast, we strolled the small garden path behind the retirement home. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we didn't, but there was something in the rhythm of walking side by side that felt familiar, like we had done this before in another life. I remembered the path behind my childhood home, where we'd sneak away after dinner. It had smelled of wet soil and wild jasmine. This path smelled of trimmed hedges and city dust, but the feeling was the same. One morning, William said, "Do you remember the swing in your backyard?" I stopped walking. "You pushed me so high I thought I'd fly," he added, smiling. "You fell off once," I said, laughing, "and you kissed my elbow because I wouldn't stop whining." We both laughed, and for a moment we weren't 84. We were 24 again, covered in grass stains and laughter. That same afternoon, I dug out an old photo album. Not the one with wedding pictures or baby photos. The one I hadn't opened in years, the one with the loose pages and missing captions. Inside were black and white snapshots from summers long gone. Church picnics, school dances. A blurry photo of William sitting on the porch steps, his hand mid-wave, forever frozen in a gesture of goodbye. When I showed it to him, he touched the corner of the photo gently. "I remember this sweater," he said. "It was itchy, but you said I looked handsome in it." "You did," I said. He looked at me then, not just with his eyes, but with something deeper. something that said he'd been waiting for this moment as long as I had. "I missed you every year," he said softly. "I missed you every day," I replied. The truth was, we didn't talk about everything. Not yet. We didn't mention his years abroad, the places he'd seen, the women he might have known. He didn't ask about Thomas or my marriage or the ache of raising children with a heart half elsewhere. We both knew there were decades we couldn't reclaim, but we could still share what was left, and so we did. We started having lunch together every Wednesday. He brought the newspaper, I brought a crossword. He pretended not to need reading glasses, I pretended not to notice. We were silly, we were shy. We were old and aching and full of things we thought had faded but hadn't. One night, as rain tapped gently on the window, William knocked on my door. He carried 2 mugs of cocoa, lukewarm and slightly overflowing. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "Neither could I replied. We sat by the window. We watched the rain. He told me about a poem he'd memorized in Italy but never recited to anyone. So he recited it to me. It was in Italian. I didn't understand a word, but I understood every line. When he finished, I was crying. So was he. "You know," I said, "everyone thinks we're just 2 old people clinging to the past." "They're right," he smiled. "But they don't understand," I continued. "We're not clinging to the past, we're finishing it." He reached for my hand. "Better late than never," he said. We sat like that until the rain stopped, and the world felt quiet again. The next morning, he left a note on my breakfast tray. It said, "You and I, we were never just a story. We were a beginning without an end. Maybe now we can finally write the last chapter, or the next one." I folded the note and placed it inside the front cover of my old photo album. Because some stories don't end. They echo, through time, through silence, through love that outlives even forgetting. It was easier sometimes to pretend we were just friends who had found comfort in one another late in life, to pretend the past didn't tug at the edges of our conversations, to pretend we weren't quietly searching for parts of ourselves in the way the others stirred their tea or folded a napkin. But the truth lingered, like perfume in the hallway long after someone had passed. A truth made of shared summers, unspoken goodbyes, and a love that had once lived loud inside our youth. Some days we leaned into it. Other days we danced around it. On Mondays, we sat in the library. William liked the armchair by the window. I preferred the corner near the plants. We didn't always speak. Sometimes we read different books and shared nothing but the occasional glance. But every so often, I'd catch him watching me, and I'd smile, like we'd both remembered something we weren't ready to say out loud. There was one morning when a new resident arrived. Her name was Evelyn. She was sharp, curious, and far too enthusiastic for 8 a.m. introductions. She sat next to William at breakfast, laughing at something he had said. I didn't hear the joke, but I heard the laugh, high and lilting. I felt something unexpected. Jealousy. It was silly, of course. We were old, too old for that sort of thing. But there it was anyway, a flicker of something I hadn't felt since I was 20. William noticed. That afternoon, he found me in the garden. "She's just friendly," he said without preamble. "I know," I replied. He looked at me for a long moment. "You've always done that," he said. Said "I know" when you're really saying "I'm not sure I believe you." I laughed. "You still remember that?" "I remember everything," he said. Later that week, we joined the weekly movie night. They played an old romantic film, one I'd seen a dozen times. William and I sat in the back, our chairs close but not quite touching. Halfway through the movie, there was a scene, a train platform, a teary goodbye. I felt his hand brush mine, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't pull away. I let our fingers tangle gently, like they used to. No words, just warmth. On Thursdays, we did puzzles. He always started with the edges. I always began with the center. It was symbolic, really. He liked structure. I chased meaning. We met somewhere in between. One morning, he looked up from the puzzle and asked, "Do you think we could have made it work back then?" I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I didn't know. So much had stood in our way. The war, time, silence, fear. But here we were, 84 years old, still asking, still hoping. "I think," I said slowly, "we did make it work, just not the way we thought we would." He smiled. I liked that answer. We didn't kiss. Not yet. It wasn't that we didn't want to. It was that we were still learning how to exist in the same space again. Still figuring out how to carry 60 years of memory in the same fragile hands. And maybe we were afraid that touching it would make it vanish. Or worse, that it wouldn't feel the same. So instead, we let the days pass. We shared soups and stories, small silences and slow walks. We let our love live between the lines, not needing to say it, because we both knew, we always had. Some secrets are too old to speak, too worn by time, too tangled in regret, too carefully buried beneath decades of quiet living. But just because something isn't spoken doesn't mean it disappears. Sometimes it just waits, like a letter never sent or a song left unfinished. William and I had learned how to live beside our silence. But silence, no matter how tender, isn't the same as peace. It was a rainy Wednesday when he finally said it. We were sitting across from each other in the reading room, pretending to focus on our books, while the patter of rain filled the space with its own kind of music. He turned to me, eyes soft but clouded. "I need to tell you something," he said. I lowered my book. He hesitated. "I've been carrying this for too long." And just like that, the years between us shifted. He told me about a letter, one he had written the night before he left for the war. A letter meant for me. "I gave it to a friend," he said, "to mail if anything happened. But I never followed up. I was scared. Scared it was too much, too honest." I stared at him. "I never got it," I said. "I know," he replied, "and I never forgave myself." I leaned back. What did it say? He looked at me with something fragile in his expression. It said, "I loved you," that I had for a long time, that if I came back, I wanted to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. The words settled around us like dust. I wanted to cry. I didn't. Instead, I reached across the table and took his hand. "We were young," I said. "We did what we could with what we knew." He nodded, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. "And what we were afraid to know," he added. Later that day, I found my own secret waiting in the back of a drawer. A photograph of us from the town's summer fair in 1962. We were standing too close, neither smiling, but both of us clearly caught mid-laugh. I'd tucked it away before my wedding to Thomas, afraid of what it meant to still carry it. I brought it to William. He stared at it for a long time, fingers tracing the edges. "You kept this?" "I couldn't throw it away," I said, "even when I tried." He looked up. "Why?" "Because it was the only proof I had that we existed, that it wasn't something I made up in my head." "You didn't," he said. "You never did." That night, after dinner, he asked if I wanted to walk with him. It was a soft evening, air warm and thick with spring. We strolled along the back garden path. The moon was rising and the smell of honeysuckle filled the air. He stopped near the old wooden bench beneath the maple tree and sat. "I was engaged once," he said suddenly. I turned to him. "She was kind in a way I admired, but I never told her about you." I didn't speak. "I couldn't," he said, "because I knew deep down I hadn't really let go." "Did she know?" I asked. "Eventually," he said. "She gave the ring back and told me to find you if I ever could." We were quiet for a long time. Then I said Thomas knew. William looked at me. About you, I clarified. Not everything, but enough. I think he always sensed that a part of me was elsewhere. Did he say anything? Only once, I said. When we were older, just before he passed. He told me he hoped I found peace, that maybe someday I'd find you again. He said love doesn't always come the way we expect, but if it comes back, let it. William closed his eyes. He was a good man. He was, I agreed, and he would have liked you. That night I dreamed of us younger, walking barefoot by the lake, fireflies blinking like scattered stars. He was holding my shoes, I was laughing. And somewhere in the background, a radio played a song I hadn't heard in years. When I woke, I couldn't remember the tune, but I remembered how it made me feel. Like everything lost wasn't really lost at all, just waitings. Some secrets shape us, some break us, and some set us free. Because sometimes love isn't about always knowing. It's about finally telling the truth, even when the truth is decades late. Even when your hair is white, your hands are wrinkled, and your voice is soft. It still matters. It always does. There are songs we forget, and then there are songs that remember us. They lie in wait, hidden in the folds of our memory, only to return in an instant. A few notes, a trembling lyric, and suddenly we're no longer in the present. We're 16 again, or 24 or 37 on a rainy Tuesday. When William played the song, I didn't know its name, but I knew exactly how it made me feel. It started with a piano, not a grand one, but the dusty upright in the corner of the lounge, its keys yellowed and uneven from years of use. A volunteer had been meant to entertain the residents that Sunday, but they canceled last minute. The staff asked if anyone else could play, more out of politeness than hope. William stood. "I can try," he said. I looked up from my knitting, startled. I hadn't known he played, or maybe I had once and forgotten. He sat, pressed a few uncertain notes, then paused. Silence. Then he played. The melody was soft, slow, the kind of tune that didn't demand attention but pulled you into its orbit anyway. It was an old song, older than most in the room. I watched as the music wrapped around the space, smoothing the wrinkles of time off our faces for a few fleeting minutes. Then came the part that made my breath catch. He hummed the refrain, not loudly, just enough. And that was when it hit me. The lake. The summer of 1962. Bare feet in the sand. He'd brought a portable radio. We'd stolen a few hours away from watchful parents and whispered futures. That song played as we danced, clumsy and close. I hadn't heard it since, but hearing it now from his lips was like opening a box I hadn't dared touch. I covered my mouth with my hand. The tears came before I could stop them. William looked up, saw me, and stopped playing. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to." "No," I said, rising to my feet. "Don't stop." He looked confused. "That song," I whispered. "You remembered." He nodded slowly. "I played it every year on the same day, June 12th. My birthday." I stepped closer. "That was the first time we danced," I said. He smiled. "And the last, until now." He stood, offered his hand, and without another word, we danced. There in the middle of the lounge, surrounded by other residents reading, dozing, or staring blankly at the television. We didn't care. We danced, slowly, carefully, like we were remembering how, like we were telling each other all the things we never dared say. When the song ended, he kissed my hand, softly, like it was still 1962, and I wept, not out of sadness, but because something inside me had come home. Afterward, we sat together by the window. The sun had begun to set, casting the world in that forgiving light that makes everything seem a little softer. I didn't think I could still cry like that, I said. William chuckled. Neither did I. We sat in silence for a long time, holding hands. Then he said, I played it for her once, the woman I almost married. I looked at him. She said it made her feel lonely. And what did it make you feel, I asked. You, he said simply. That night, I wrote in my journal. Today, I danced to a song I had forgotten. And in that song, I remembered everything I needed to know. The past wasn't a place to live, but sometimes you had to visit it, just long enough to bring a piece of it back with you. The next morning, there was a note slipped beneath my door. It was from William. One sentence. Let's not wait 60 years to dance again. There was a room at the end of the hallway, one of the older ones, tucked away behind the sunroom and the supply closet. No one ever spoke of it much. Most residents passed it by without a second thought. But to me, it had always caught my eye. It was the curtain, a yellow one, pale and faded with embroidered edges that fluttered slightly whenever the window was open. It stood out in a building full of beige and cream. I used to walk past it during my afternoon strolls and wonder who lived there. Wonder if they chose that color themselves, or if it had always been there, waiting for someone bold enough to keep it. One day, William asked if I wanted to see his room. It had taken months to get to this moment. Months of morning teas, shared crosswords, slow dances, and all the silences in between. But this felt different, intimate in a way that made me nervous and thrilled and fragile all at once. I nodded. I'd like that, I said. And that's how I found myself standing before the door with the yellow curtain, heart stammering like a teenager, hand poised to knock even though I was invited. He opened the door before I could. Come in, he said gently. I stepped inside. It was a small room just like mine, but filled with details that whispered of William. A bookshelf with worn spines and dog-eared pages. A collection of postcards pinned to the wall. Some yellowed with age, others clearly recent. A photograph of his mother in a silver frame beside the bed. A tea mug on the windowsill, still warm. And in the corner, a record player. The same one he'd used that night he played our song. I walked slowly, taking it all in. My eyes landed on a journal sitting atop the bedside table. Not prying, but curious, I glanced toward it. William followed my gaze. You can read it if you'd like, he said. It's not private, not anymore. I hesitated, then sat beside it and opened the first page. June 12, 1973. Today would have been her 33rd birthday. I sat by the lake again. I brought the radio. The song still plays, even when she doesn't. I felt my breath catch. Page after page, decade after decade, he had written to me. Not just on birthdays, but on days that hurt. Days he felt proud. Days he felt lost. I wasn't there, but he made me part of them anyway. My tears fell silently onto the pages. Why didn't you ever show me this before, I asked. Because I was afraid it would make you sad, he said. It does, I replied, but in a way that matters. He nodded. That's what I hoped. Later, we sat together by the window, watching the yellow curtain dance in the breeze. Why yellow? I asked it. He smiled. You wore a yellow dress the first time I told you I loved you. Under the willow tree behind your parents' house. It was the color of sunlight, of warmth, of you. I'd forgotten the dress, but not the moment. I reached for his hand. I never wore yellow again, I said, after you left. He squeezed my fingers. Then I wore it for both of us, he said. That night, I dreamed of the yellow dress, of the willow tree, of his voice, young and unsure, telling me he loved me as though the words might shatter. I woke with the memory clinging to my skin, like dew. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wore color, a yellow scarf hidden in the back of my drawer since my 30s. I tied it around my neck, looked in the mirror, and for a moment I saw her, the girl I used to be. She was older now, yes, softer, lined with memory, but still her. Still me. When William saw me, his face lit up like morning. "You remembered," he whispered. "You made me want to," I replied. We spent the day in his room. He showed me old letters he'd kept, photographs of places he'd visited, Naples, Bruges, Tokyo. We listened to records and told stories that had been waiting too long. He showed me a drawer filled with scraps of poems. "I never got good at writing them," he said, "but they helped me feel close to you." I picked one up. She walks beside me still, even when I walk alone, in shadows, in scent, in the silence of morning. I held it to my chest. "You don't need to be good," I said. "You just need to be honest." He smiled. "Then I've always written well about you." As the sun dipped low, I stood by the window and watched the curtain one more time. It moved like memory, soft, persistent, and golden. "Do you think we'd have been happy all those years ago?" I asked suddenly. William came to stand beside me. "I think we were always meant to be," he said, "but maybe we needed all that time to become who we are now." I nodded. "Maybe this is our beginning." He took my hand. "Maybe it always was. Some rooms are just rooms, and some become the place where your heart remembers how to beat." That yellow curtain still flutters in the breeze. But now it isn't a mystery. It's a promise that no matter how long it takes, love always finds its way back. Even to a room at the end of a quiet hallway. Even at 84, rain has a way of unearthing things. Memories, regrets, forgotten songs, old promises. It creeps in, quiet and persistent, finding the cracks in window frames and hearts alike. That morning, the clouds rolled in like an old friend returning without warning, and the sky broke open before breakfast. For most residents, it meant staying indoors, cards, reading, a film in the common room. But for me, the rain meant something else. It meant William, because the last time we had kissed, really kissed, it had been raining. And I'd never forgotten how it felt. The sound of the downpour filled every corner of the home, wrapping itself around the hallways, soaking into the silence. I found him in the library, as always, by the window, book open but unread. "You remember the rain?" I asked. He looked up at me. "Which time?" I smiled. "The first." He closed the book gently. "Of course I do." And without another word, we sat and listened, letting the past drip slowly back into the present. That afternoon, we took our tea to the sunroom, which now felt more like a sanctuary. The windows fogged with humidity, the yellow curtain in his room visible just across the garden, waving softly like it missed us. William placed a hand over mine. "I used to think," he said slowly, "that if we had kissed once more before I left, it would have been enough to hold on to. But I was wrong." "Why?" He looked at me, eyes heavy with years. "Because it was never about the kiss. It was about what came after, what we never got to have." We sat in that stillness for a long time. I watched the rain trickle down the glass in long, elegant streaks, like fingers tracing old stories. Outside, the garden blurred, colors running together in a watercolor wash of greens and browns and grays. "Let's go," I said suddenly. William blinked. "Go where?" "Out there," he chuckled. "It's pouring." So it poured that day too, the day we danced by the lake. He grinned, slow and surprised. "Margaret, are you asking me to run in the rain with you? At our age?" "No," I said, standing. "I'm asking you to remember who we are." We slipped on our coats, mine far too thin for the chill, his old and fraying at the cuffs, and walked out the back door. The staff didn't stop us. They watched, bemused and silent, as we stepped into the downpour. The rain hit my skin like 1,000 small awakenings. Cold, honest, alive. We didn't run. We walked hand in hand through the garden path, past the roses now bent under the weight of water, past the benches slick with memory. "Here," I said, stopping beneath the old maple tree. "This isn't the lake," he said. "No," I said, "but it's enough." And there, beneath the canopy of leaves, in the middle of a spring rain, William kissed me. Not gently, not politely, but like he had been waiting 60 years. When we returned inside, soaked to the bone, the residents clapped. Someone whistled. One of the nurses handed us towels, trying not to grin. William leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Worth every drop." Later that evening, after warm showers and dry clothes, we sat by the fire in the lounge. The heat settled into our bones slowly, thawing something deeper than cold. He looked at me. "I want to ask you something." I nodded. "When Thomas was dying," he said gently, "did he know you still loved me?" I didn't answer right away. The question hurt, not because of its boldness, but because of the truth it carried. "He knew I had a past," I said, "and he knew part of me still lived there. But he also knew I loved him too, just differently." William nodded, eyes cast down. "And you?" I asked. "Did you ever let yourself love anyone else?" He exhaled. "I tried, but I always compared. Even when I didn't mean to. No one else ever made the rain feel like music." I reached for his hand. We didn't need to say more. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, but its echo lingered in the air. I rose quietly, wrapped myself in a shawl, and walked the hallway to his room. He was awake, sitting in bed, reading. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. I shook my head. "Would you mind some company?" He opened the blanket. "Not at all." I slipped in beside him. We didn't touch. Not at first. We simply lay there, shoulder to shoulder. Listening to the quiet. Then he whispered, "Thank you for today, for the rain." "It wasn't mine to give," I said, "but you made it beautiful again." In the dark, I felt his fingers trace mine, and I knew this was not a second chance. It was the continuation of a story that had only paused. Like the rain, it always comes back. So does love. Even if it has to wait, there are questions that live at the back of the throat. Heavy, trembling, waiting for the right moment to be spoken, only to realize that the right moment doesn't exist. And yet, some questions still find their way out. Not because the time is perfect, but because the heart refuses to keep quiet any longer. It began on a Tuesday. William had started keeping a small notebook in his shirt pocket, scribbling thoughts, observations, even short poems. I'd caught glimpses of them over the past week. Little notes like, "Today she smiled before the tea even steeped. I think that means she's healing." Or, "If I could freeze a moment, it would be the one where she tucked her hair behind her ear and didn't realize I was watching." They weren't written for me to see, but when I did, they felt like quiet gifts. That morning, he brought out a piece of paper, more worn than the others, folded tightly, yellowing at the edges. "I've had this since 1965, he said, placing it gently between us on the bench in the garden. "It's a question," he added, "one I never got to ask." My heart stumbled. There's a strange kind of anticipation that blooms when you know something sacred is about to be revealed. He didn't hand me the paper. He unfolded it himself slowly and read aloud. "If we had just one more year together, how would you want to spend it?" I stared at him. "Why didn't you ask me back then?" He looked down at the creases in the paper. "Because I thought we had forever, and then suddenly we didn't." We sat quietly for a long time. The garden was buzzing with spring, bees drifting from flower to flower, birds gossiping overhead. But I barely noticed. All I could hear was that question. 1 year. Just one. How would I want to spend it? That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window in my room, watching the moon cast long shadows across the walkway. I thought about everything I had left undone in my life. Everything I'd postponed, everything I traded for routine. And I wrote, on a blank page of my journal, I wrote my answer. If I had one more year with you, I'd want mornings just like these. Quiet, shared tea, crosswords with far too many clues I pretend not to know. I'd want to sit in your room and read the letters you never sent. I'd want to visit the lake again. Just once, even if we can't walk far. Even if all we do is sit by the water and hold hands. I want to dance at least 10 more times. Slowly, out of rhythm, but always together. I'd want to kiss you without apology. I'd want to laugh until my ribs ache. I'd wanted to tell you stories I've never told anyone, not because they're important, but because I want you to know me. I'd want to write you into the end of every sentence that used to end in silence. And when the year ends, I'd want you beside me, still holding my hand. The next morning, I slipped the letter into his notebook. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. That afternoon, he brought me wildflowers from the garden, tied with a ribbon. We may not have a year, he said, but we have today. I nodded. And tomorrow? He smiled. Let's earn it. Over the next week, something changed. Not dramatically, but in the way we held hands longer, the way we laughed louder, the way we sat closer without noticing, the way our conversations deepened. One evening, while watching the sunset from the bench by the fountain, he turned to me and said, I love you. It wasn't the first time he'd said it in our youth, but it was the first time he'd said it since we found each other again. I didn't reply right away, not because I didn't feel it, but because I wanted to feel every piece of it, every letter, every syllable. And when I did answer, I leaned in, rested my forehead against his and whispered, I've always loved you, even when I thought I'd forgotten how. He told me another secret that night. I bought a ring, and I said. I blinked. When? 1963, just before I left. It wasn't much. Silver, simple. I kept it in my pocket the whole time. Thought I'd propose when I came back. What happened to it? He hesitated. I buried it in the garden behind my parents' house. Thought it was cursed, or maybe I was. I reached for his hand. Maybe we're not cursed, I said. Maybe we're just late. He laughed, a full, deep laugh that made my chest swell. That sounds like us. One morning, the staff brought in an old Polaroid camera for the residents to use. For fun, they said, capture the moment. We took a picture, him, in his cardigan and crooked grin, me with the yellow scarf and eyes that finally felt like they belonged to someone living. We pinned it on the corkboard in the common room, and beneath it he wrote, the answer to the question I never got to ask. That evening, while I brushed his hair, something I'd begun to do most nights, he looked at me and asked, do you think we were meant to find each other again? Yes, I said. But not because the universe planned it, because we never stopped walking toward each other, even when we didn't know it. He closed his eyes. Then I'm glad I never asked that question back then. Why? He opened his eyes and looked at me, because now I know the answer is real. And maybe that's what love is. Not a grand gesture, not a perfect moment, but a question asked. And finally answered. Even at 84, forever doesn't always come wrapped in years. Sometimes it arrives in the moments we never thought we'd have. A late morning hand held a little tighter, a smile shared over lukewarm tea, the quiet knowledge that someone knows your story and chooses to stay anyway.